welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast, a breaking news episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. It's been a little while since we had a breaking news episode. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams with us on this Thursday afternoon. Our guy Ben Wolk is down in San Antonio for the All-American Bowl. But Kipp and I are jumping right back in this thing, and we're going to get right to the news on Thursday afternoon. Georgia quarterback Carson Beck, with a bit of a role reversal of course, had declared for the NFL draft previously, is now preparing to enter the transfer portal. Carson is looking to use that last year of eligibility, play elsewhere, and will be one of the most sought after players in the transfer portal this cycle. So, Kipp, I'll throw it to you first. Give me your initial reaction to the news. I don't think any of us were necessarily anticipating that Carson would change what his plans were for the 2025 season, but he does, and now Georgia's starting quarterback for the majority of the 2024 season appears set to be on the move.
Well, the initial reaction is one of just shock, and we thought that, this chapter had ended. But, given that we've had now, 15, 20 minutes to kind of process it, it makes sense. I even had that article last week with, Todd McShay talking about how his opinion was that it was a mistake that Beck was entering the draft. And you can kind of find some key points that he made there, and that, Beck's stock right now is not what it was a year ago. He still has eligibility. We're in the NIL era where you can get multiple millions of dollars to play college football. And if you think you're going to be a mid-round pick, why not get, let's just assume, similar salary to give yourself a chance to boost your stock? So looking back on that and seeing how this last season unfolded for Carson Beck, it would make sense for him to return to college football for another year. The fact that now it looks like he will be doing that at another program, there is a little bit of a shock there. This is a quarterback who a lot of articles were written about him waiting 3 years for his turn to start at Georgia and getting that opportunity and being basically a 2-year starter for a program like Georgia. That was something that everyone kind of credited him for, being that latest quarterback at Georgia, to be patient, and in an era where if you're not playing at quarterback, you just see dozens of transfers every offseason. But I think a change of scenery could do Carson Beck, a lot of good. So, we're reacting on this pod, and right now I can see why Carson Beck made this move.
No, I totally agree. And I'll give my thought in a second, but I wanted to set you up to explain this. Brown J404 on Twitter said, I thought it was past the deadline for the portal. Can you kind of shed a light on why this happened on Thursday, why this news came out on Thursday?
Okay, so for teams that are playing in the college football playoff, they get 5 days after that game is played, their last game in the playoff is played, to enter the portal. So Georgia played on January 2nd. So that would mean they would have to submit the paperwork to enter the portal by January the 7th. Now, even when that's done, schools have, to process that paperwork, and often it takes up to 48 hours for that to be done. So the reason why that news is breaking today is because now Carson Beck is showing up in the portal system as being a transfer, in the transfer portal from Georgia. So it's not just for Carson Beck. Any other player on Georgia's team who may have submitted that paperwork, they could be showing up in that portal as we record this podcast on January 9th. Today, there could be other players technically from Georgia that show up in the portal, but that's why Carson Beck's showing up now, is because if he submitted it by the deadline, it could take up to 48 hours for him to show up in the system.
To give my thoughts, it's a lot like what Kip already shared. I think it makes a lot of sense for Carson to do this. I think that, an element that I don't know that Kip really hit on that I think is a driving force here is that elbow injury. He's not going to be able to throw, I think, until the spring. There was going to be a lot of questions about that if he went through the draft process. And, he was going to have to try to prove himself in a short amount of time because of that injury. I think it makes sense for him to go into the portal. He's probably the top player that's been in the transfer portal this offseason. Kip, if there's someone else I'm not thinking of, just chime in. I mean, I think he would be the number one guy if we listed everyone who has gone into the portal. And with that comes a lot of opportunity. He's going to get paid, and that's something that I've kind of made the point on the Junkyard message board is just that there's a lot that's going to come with this. There's going to be a financial windfall to do this, and you've already kind of seen it with the conversations about where he could go and some of the teams that have stood out. And I did want to talk about that as well. Kip, I want to pass along what 24/7 Sports Chris Hummer said on a CBS Sports hit. Quote, Miami is the natural fit here. I'd probably term them a very early favorite in this process. Miami has aggressively pursued QB transfer options behind the scenes the last couple weeks. Miami would make a lot of sense for Carson Beck because they need a quarterback. You have his girlfriend down there playing college basketball. A lot of folks have been all over her and the Cavender part of it. I think you're kind of overblowing that part. I think you're looking at the fact that he's going to make a lot of money to make this decision, and at the same time have a chance to boost his draft stock because he wasn't. I don't think with that elbow injury he was going to be a first round quarterback and probably not a second round quarterback in the 2025 draft. But I want to share too. Pete Thamel from ESPN had some good details as far as when a decision could come from Carson Beck. Pete Thamel reported, quote, the timeline for a choice is within a week. So that sort of makes me think that, he has a pretty good sense of where he's going to be. Beck will not be able to throw until March, and he's expected to miss spring practice. He'll be good to go well before summer camp after elbow surgery that he had a few weeks ago. So let's talk about that piece of it now for what Carson does next. I feel really confident he's not coming back to Georgia. I don't think that's news to anyone who's listening. This is Gunnar Stockton's team. I think you got that sense in the Sugar Bowl. And quite frankly, when you consider the financial piece of it, I don't think Georgia was going to get into a bidding war to bring Carson Beck back. I think they're going to wish him luck, and they're going to roll with Gunnar Stockton going forward. But what do you think about what we've heard to this point on Carson's options? Do you have a team that you're kind of watching as the team in what looks like might be a very short sweepstakes to get the top quarterback in the portal?
Is there a team that has recent experience of talking a transfer quarterback out of the NFL draft who then might be a high pick in this next NFL draft? Let's think about that for a second, guys. Let's talk about the Miami Hurricanes. I mean, they just had Cam Ward come in. They convinced him to not enter the draft last year. And, outside of a possibility of a team falling in love with Shedeur Sanders, I would say that Cam Ward is a betting favorite to be the first overall pick in the draft. So there is precedent right there. We know that Miami is willing to shell out NIL money. I think Cam probably got in excess of $2 million last year. I don't know the numbers. Let's not pretend to know. But let's say that, Carson Beck, as an established starter who's thrown, for dozens of touchdowns the last two seasons at Georgia, had one of the best offensive outputs of any quarterback to ever play from Georgia in 2023. I would say that he's going to be in that $2 to $3+ million range if that's what they want to offer. And looking at their depth chart and also just looking at the transfer portal, knowing they've missed out on guys that I would say are not as talented as Carson Beck. I mean, we're talking about John Mateer from Washington State, Fernando Mendoza. We talked about him with Georgia, the Cal transfer, Malik Murphy at Duke, Connor Wegman at Texas A&M, Miller Moss at USC. None of those guys have come close to doing what Carson Beck's done. So the market is going to be there for him. I can't imagine there's many programs in the country that wouldn't make room for him if they could. We do not know if there was any conversations that happened with Georgia and him, but we do know that, it was probably agreed upon that for both parties it would be good, if he moved on regardless at this point. But again, there's still an assumption there. We don't know if that conversation took place, and we don't even know if they've talked in the last couple of weeks since he declared for the draft. But Miami does make a lot of sense. Again, they had the precedent. They just basically wrote the book on how to take a quarterback from the transfer portal and improve his stock. That's a great recruiting tool. Him being from Jacksonville, I mean, I think the girlfriend part is completely overblown. It's just a happy convenience there. And I also just think, as far as a change of scenery, I think Carson Beck kind of fits in Miami. So I just think, again, it just makes too much sense. And we know that Miami's going to be interested. So I think assuming they're the favorites is a pretty strong bet. And I think a really good fit for him overall.
No, I think it can work out well for him. And again, they haven't taken the quarterback you mentioned, Kip, that they, had been in the mix for a few guys, hadn't been able to make it happen. And no, I mean, I understand the frustration with Georgia fans with it playing out this way, but it could ultimately work out well for everybody involved. Carson gets a chance to get healthy, play another season. Gunnar Stockton gets his chance. I really thought that Gunnar played pretty well in that Sugar Bowl. I don't think he was the reason they lost that game. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating to watch. I do think this will come together pretty quickly. My prediction, like you said, Kip, I'm saying that Carson winds up at Miami. That's not any insider intel, anything like that. That's just reading the tea leaves and sort of the setup of where things stand right now. I saw On3 had Ohio State. It would be quite ironic if they went and got another former Georgia quarterback. Name another time that happened. And Texas Tech. That's who, no real rooting interest here. I'd love to see the Red Raiders because they have been busy in the portal. Them go get Carson Beck. But no, I mean, I think it's a situation where I can understand the frustration for some, but I do think, like you pointed out, I mean, Todd McShay was like, this is not a good decision for you to go in the draft. And it's a situation where I was caught off guard when it happened on Thursday. But I thought that was a real possibility after he got hurt, that he may go in the portal and go to a school like Miami and kind of let Georgia turn the page and let him turn the page as well. Any parting thoughts on the Carson Beck news and what we'll be watching on that front for the next few weeks?
Yeah, I think you look at his stock right now, like you said, I would guess he's probably you never know what teams are going to do at quarterback. As a Falcons fan, I could tell you, you just really never know. But probably a third round pick, early, late. It could be anywhere right there. And so, as Todd McShay said, I mean, that's $4 to $6 million guaranteed over the course of 4 years. So, again, spitballing, if he can get $3 million in one season with a chance to boost his stock, knowing that I think right now, if you look at his rehab, he's probably looking at June, July, probably when he can come back. So, heading into camp, I think that makes a lot of sense for him. And I just think that Miami's probably a good fit. And as for Georgia, yeah, it's a weird way how it all unfolded. But I mean, weird things happen all the time when you're covering Georgia football. If you've seen it over the last couple of years, there's always going to be twists and turns. That's why you guys have us here to talk about this and to break these down for you as we see curveball after curveball and new experiences unfold left and right. But I think Georgia is going to be fine. I think they showed in that Sugar Bowl that they have a quarterback that they can go to spring camp with, who has a lot of potential, who made a lot of outstanding throws, and who does add a little bit, an added wrinkle there. Someone who's just willing to tuck that ball and run when he needs to. An aspect of that, Carson Beck never really unlocked. and kind of made that team as one-dimensional as you could possibly get whenever he was doing that. So you have that in Gunnar Stockton. And this chapter, the Carson Beck chapter, we can, basically officially close it and say that Georgia's going into camp with a new starting quarterback, and at the same time, a talented roster with guys like Ryan Puglisi showing a lot of promise. I think he's a guy that will push Gunnar Stockton in the spring and has a bright future ahead of him.
The one thing I would say to wrap up the Carson Beck conversation is that nothing changed for Georgia on Thursday. They knew that they were rolling forward without Carson Beck. Just turns out that more than likely he's going to be playing on Saturdays rather than Sunday. And I will say, it doesn't look like he'll transfer within the SEC. So more likely than not, Georgia's not going to have to play him. But consider the possibility of next year, the college football playoff. Could Carson Beck, could number 15 be on the other side if Georgia gets that far? That would definitely make for something to kind of monitor when we get into the 2025 season. I'm going to take a quick break, come back, and talk about some of the draft decisions that have been made since we recorded on Tuesday. Also, multiple portal additions for Georgia since our last episode. Talk UGA hoops. And then we'll also talk about the college football playoff semifinals that will be getting underway starting Thursday night. All right, Kipp, I did the best I could to look through our notes from the Tuesday episode to see what has happened as far as the NFL draft since the last time we recorded. Now, if I have this right, what we've learned from the last episode, Ty Ingram-Dawkins is moving on, and we did learn that Dillon Bell and Brett Thorson will be coming back. They're one of three players who have said they're coming back. Christian Miller, who had already done so, is also among them coming back. So we have that news, and we're still waiting as of Thursday afternoon on running back Trevor Etienne, tight end Oscar Delp, and cornerback Dalen Everett. So let's start with the folks who have announced. What did you think of what we've learned? Ty Ingram-Dawkins moving on, but Dillon Bell and Brett Thorson coming back for 2025.
Well, Dillon Bell was a guy that we're still trying to see him fully unlocked. I think he played a lot of the X position this past season. Now with, the other additions and just looking overall at that position room, maybe he is able to slide back into his natural spot, or maybe he's a guy that you just move all across the field. But I think that's a valuable addition or returning addition to this position room, and a guy that, I still see as you plug him in as a starter alongside a couple other guys. And that's a guy that, again, incredibly valuable for Georgia. I think this is a position that we can all agree on has the most room for growth coming off last year. And I think he is a guy that, again, if you really want to unlock this overall offense, the potential here, you got to figure out the best way to use Dillon Bell this offseason. And so the fact that you have him back, you've convinced him that you're going to be able to do that, when knowing that if he enters the portal, he's one of the most, coveted players available. I think you have to really look at that and understand that's a win for Georgia. I know that his play was up and down last season, but like I said, he's a guy you want on your roster. And I do think it bodes well for Georgia that they were able to tell him, hey, you didn't have your best season. We didn't have our best season. But, come back this offseason. Let's put in the work. Let's, figure this out together. We will bounce back and you will be better for it. I mean, there's something to be said about that. So I think obviously the addition of him was huge. The departure of Ingram-Dawkins, that one hurts. That is one where I think we all said in our group chat, you, I, and Ben, that I mean, this is one that kind of sets Georgia back, but also I'm more surprised by that than really Carson Beck entering the transfer portal. I just think that that is a player where you saw flashes of him being an elite playmaker, but I can't sit here and say that he put it all together. And whatever his draft grade he got, it must have been better than where I think he's going to go. Because I honestly would say that you're drafting him based on his physical potential than what we really saw in the field over the course of a season. A guy that did not make 20 tackles this last season, a guy that has 4 career sacks in 4 years at Georgia, and a guy that, all that being said, you lock him in as a starter, and he was one of the most important people you needed to have coming back in your defense. So now Georgia's defensive front already looking kind of thin. I think we can safely say that there are depth issues and that Georgia will need to, hopefully for them, find somebody in the portal because it's next man up, but there are not a lot of guys in that position room right now.
Yeah, with Ty Ingram Dawkins, it's not a thing where there's like, ill will on our side or anything like that. But I mean, he strikes me as like a 5th round guy, maybe at best. Like it's going to be hard for him. And I thought he was a guy that would come back to Georgia. The one thing I will say, and I might have brought this up on Tuesday's episode, the one argument I can sort of see to him going is I finally had a healthy season. I showed you glimpses of what I could do. Do I want to come back and run the risk of getting hurt again? That to me is the only real argument of, okay, I should go ahead and cash in rather than keep playing and run the risk. With the other guys, Brett Thorson, shout out for going with the other guys. I enjoyed that so much, and that was very much a Brett Thorson move to announce that way. And Dylan Bell, I had high hopes for him in 2024. I thought he was a guy that was capable of becoming an all SEC caliber receiver, and he didn't play up to that. But now he's going to have the opportunity. We're going to get into this in a few minutes, but his brother Micah is going to be on the team next year, so that'll probably be nice to have them together, and maybe he can take a step forward, with Gunnar Stockton now serving as the quarterback. I did want to talk about this with Ty Ingram Dawkins moving on. Who are some of the guys that are left on this defensive line that you're kind of keeping an eye on? And I'll throw out a few names that are going to have to step up. Gabe Harris, a guy that I think that they're really excited about. I think, played at times this year, but is going to have to play a much bigger role next year. Joseph Jonah-Ajonye, it's a shame that he got hurt when he did mid-October. Wasn't able to play in that Texas game and then had surgery the following week. I think they're going to have to turn him and say, look, you're going to have to play a very big role going forward. Some of the other guys, maybe a Jordan Thomas, and they've got some young guys coming in now on the defensive line. But is there anyone in particular you're kind of watching now that Ty Ingram Dawkins is moving on as, hey, this is the guy that's going to have to step up?
There's always so many guys we can name here. You mentioned Gabe Harris and Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. I mean, the only other after that, we're talking about Justin Green. And then again, I mentioned it before, Isaiah Gibson. I mean, he looked closer to 270 than the 250 he's listed at. So he could be a guy that bounces back and forth between defensive end and outside linebacker. But if he does that, again, one of those positions, you're going to go into the spring with 3 guys on scholarship. That is the bare minimum for a depth chart that you want. And Georgia's played with closer to 7 to 8 at each of these positions before. And when Georgia's defense is at its best, it's able to rotate these guys in. So I think whether they add to the pass rusher position, which I think they will. I think that's a position, if you're looking at the portal and what Georgia might add, in the next coming weeks, I think that outside linebacker, they'll look to add someone there. Maybe Isaiah Gibson goes to emergency depth at defensive end as he continues to physically develop during the spring, getting in the weight room and all that. And you go into the spring, because I don't know if they're going to find a guy at this stage at defensive end from the portal this window. But you go into spring with 4 guys, you see how they look in spring, but then you also attack the portal during the spring window, because again, right now you have, I think, 11 guys on your defensive line, and that's if nobody else leaves and nothing else happens. So Xavier McLeod, you can probably lock him in. I mean, he is coming back as a starting nose, looks really promising there late in the season. Christian Miller coming back. How big is that now? It was already huge that he didn't go to the draft, but as of now, I mean, there's your defensive tackle with Jordan Hall backing him up. And then, yeah, Gabe Harris at defensive end with Joseph Jonah-Johnny, coming back healthy off, an injury where, we thought he might be able to earn some snaps as a freshman, which you're doing that at Georgia on the defensive line. That's impressive. So that's kind of what your defensive line depth chart looks like right now. And then you're asking freshmen to come in and fill out the two deep. So, yeah, I can't say I've seen the defensive line look like this. I mean, definitely not in the last couple of years. This is as thin as it's been, and I think it will be the focal point moving forward for Georgia in the transfer portal.
McLeod was a good player to point out. I think I was impressed, and I think he's just a redshirt freshman, or he was in 2024. So he's somebody to watch. Another edge rusher, Grace from South Dakota. He's been visiting Georgia. I think that's going to help at least, defensive end. He may play more outside linebacker with Damon Wilson moving on. Stay glued to Dogs 24/7. We'll share the latest on that visit and other portal targets. Speaking of portal targets, let's talk about some of the folks who had announced has committed to Georgia since Tuesday's podcast. We mentioned Micah Bell, running back coming over from Vanderbilt, Dylan Bell's little brother, but also Texas A&M receiver Noah Thomas, Miami safety Jaden Harris, and UAB safety Adrian Maddox. And Maddox was a guy who was committed to Florida for about 48 hours and then flipped to Georgia. What do you think of the latest haul for Georgia in the transfer portal? Any of those names stick out to you as Georgia continues adding through the portal?
As dire as I made it sound for Georgia on the defensive line, the opposite can be said for the safety position and the wide receiver position. I think Georgia's done an outstanding job, especially at the safety position where you look now. Georgia's got a strong two deep at all three safety spots. I mean, you look at Joel Aguero coming back as the star. I think Adrian Maddox fits in a lot as a guy backing him up heading into the spring. And then you have Kyron Jones. You have Todd Robinson possibly at that position. One safety spot, KJ Bolden's coming back. There's one strong starter right there. Ja'Cory Thomas is a guy that we said probably, the favorite heading into the spring. But now you bring in a guy who just started for Miami and Jaden Harris to back him up and push him. I think that's a great competition to have. And then Zion Branch, maybe he's the backup to KJ Bolden this year. And you bring in three freshmen on scholarship as well. Love the depth moves there. And then looking at the wide receiver position, we talked about it. That room needed a boost. You're getting five, very talented freshmen, but at the same time, being able to add a guy who had 8 touchdown catches last year and Noah Thomas, a guy where we talked all year about, man, Ra Thomas and Colby Young were being looked to play a big role in this offense. That down field threat, the fact that Georgia still tried to force those 50-50 balls a lot. Carson Beck tried to force it into guys that aren't really natural catch radius guys. Well, that's Noah Thomas. I mean, he's definitely a guy that's going to be able to help you in the screen game, in the red zone. Huge addition there. And I think it just kind of changes the whole dynamic of that wide receiver room. Because now, again, you have a two deep that you can go with. If you're, if you don't know if Colby Young is going to be back, the possibility is still there. But just going out there and starting Noah Thomas, a Dylan Bell, maybe Colby Young's your other starter. You can roll with guys like that. And then having, London Humphreys, having I take it back. Not just you have Zachariah Branch as a guy that can slide in this slot. You can move Dylan Bell around, and you have those two and Noah Thomas as your starters. That's a group that Georgia has a lot of can have a lot of confidence in, that Gunnar Stockton can really, get some chemistry going with this full offseason of being able to throw to those guys. And then you mix in those freshmen. You give Sokovie White and Nitro Tuggle bigger roles coming into this season. And that, they're going to rotate 6 guys in. Well, I think they're going to have 6 guys they can trust. And I think, looking back, that's going to be that position group where you see the most growth, and you see the most growth in an offense that really tried and threw the ball more than they'd ever thrown it before, but did not have the results you needed. And now you can have some dependable pass catchers out there. I think it'll just make everything go a lot smoother for Georgia's offense.
Pop quiz, Kipp. So Noah Thomas had 8 touchdown receptions this season. How many Georgia receivers had 8 touchdowns or more this season?
I'm going to go with 0 would be my guess. I'm trying to draw. Did anyone have 5?
I think Arian might have had 6. The answer was 0. No one had as many touchdown catches as Noah Thomas. That's by far, I would say, I guess you could argue that Zachariah Branch might be a little bit bigger than Noah, but Georgia had a real need at that X position. So to get that 6'6" receiver, I think that's huge. I think you're looking at, as it stands right now, that you've got Noah Thomas at the X, you've got Zachariah Branch at the Y, and then you've got Dylan Bell as your Z receiver. Those are huge. Jaden Harris, I'm hoping to have a breakdown of his game on Friday. I was going to have that on Thursday afternoon. Something happened. Can't really figure out what delayed my announcement and that story. But, he's hit or miss. I thought, honestly, you had a really good, basically instant comparison when he committed to Dan Jackson, because the film I've seen, kind of iffy as a tackler, took some really bad angles on the plays I've seen, but pretty good in run support. When he gets up there, he can make plays at the line or behind the line. He's a guy that's at least interesting, and you're throwing in someone else that is capable of playing. Haven't had a chance really to watch Adrian Maddox yet. We'll be interested to do that. And Micah Bell, getting him for depth. Another running back. I kind of compare this to when they got Lenneth Whitehead from Tennessee. Micah's not going to be a guy that plays a big role, but that is huge. Just to get him in more depth at the position. Obviously that connection he'll have with Dylan, that'll be cool to see. Really, the only other news on the portal front for Georgia, Colin Gill, the defensive back they got before last season, went in the portal. Not sure where he's going to end up. Wasn't a factor at all. I don't know that he played a single snap this season. A guy that they kind of took a flyer on. He was getting ready to go to Temple after starting his college career at Oregon. So not a significant loss, other than that is another loss in that secondary. And then David Daniel Sisavon, who had been dismissed back in the summer, he lands at Troy. He's a guy that had started against South Carolina in 2023. I think he had 10 tackles that season. Not a huge loss. Obviously, you just went through a season without him. But he's a guy that, I think Georgia fans should wish well. He was in the program for quite a while, stepped in and played a decent bit, but he'll have a chance to go play in the Sun Belt now. All right, Kipp, let's talk a little Georgia men's basketball as we get closer to rounding out this episode. And man, Tuesday night was a fantastic night for Mike White and company. They beat number 6 Kentucky 82-69. A lot of credit. They led the game by 13 at half. They win the game by 13. Outstanding offensive rebounding. I think they had 14 offensive rebounds, led to 17 second chance points. Great game from Asa Newell. 12 of his 17 points came after halftime. Just did a really good job of thwarting what Kentucky wanted to do offensively. Kentucky just never seemed to be in any kind of rhythm. It was sort of funny leading up to Tuesday's game. I talked a lot about, and Georgia does not need to get into a three-point shooting contest with this Kentucky team. And they outshot him from 3, and they outshot him just generally. Georgia did a great job getting to the free throw line, 29-38. This was a huge win, Kipp. I think this is Mike White's biggest since he got to Georgia. Georgia now 13-2, 1-1 in the SEC. Got a tough challenge coming on Saturday against Oklahoma, an Oklahoma team that lost to Texas A&M on Wednesday. But Stegman was rocking on Tuesday night. The team provided a great show, a great performance for those fans. And I think there's some really positive vibes around this Bulldogs basketball program.
Definitely. I think as someone who's, watched Georgia basketball kind of flounder about, since, Jim Herrick, you thought Georgia basketball was coming back. Obviously, the NCAA kind of let Georgia know, no, you're not ready for the spotlight yet. Let's go ahead and, put you guys back on the back burner with Jim Herrick, Dennis Felton. I mean, Mark Fox, who was on the side, the court for this game as an assistant at Kentucky, and the crowd, he got a warm welcome. Still very much a beloved figure in Athens because, I mean, again, it's kind of you don't know what you got till it's gone with him, because he did get Georgia to multiple tournament appearances, just could not take that next step with them. And then, now you have Georgia just hoping to get back to the big dance. And I think that's kind of where we're at now, where finally Georgia fans can, kind of look to the bracketology, see if their team's there, check the latest updates, see that Georgia's net rating is back inside, I think, the top 30 as we record this podcast. I think they may have been 29th last I looked, but that it's something where you can actually follow this program and hope for some postseason play. And I think that Ole Miss game kind of made you think, oh no, is this just where Georgia basketball is again? And now with this win over Kentucky, I think you've kind of flipped it. You went 1-1 there, you reset right back where we are. Where okay, this Georgia team has a future lottery pick in Asa Newell, a guy that I think the announcer said during the Kentucky game, the one part of his game that hasn't been unlocked yet was him being the alpha on the court. And it was like there were like 8 minutes left in the game, and he had like 12 points, 3 rebounds at the time. And I was like, really? And then he proceeded. I think he ended up with like 17 and 5 or something like that, which is basically what his average is right now as a true freshman. And I was like, all right, well, if you think that's the part of his game that still needs to be unlocked, I thought it was free throws, but hey, let's not really start picking this apart. He's a guy that you can depend on in conference play, and it showed in that Kentucky game. I talked about it. Him and Somto, they had to go out there and impose their will on a big front court duo from Kentucky. And guess what? I mean, the Kentucky fan base and the writers are still trying to figure out what happened, and they did exactly. I'm just glad that they listened to this podcast, took it to heart, and got it done on the court, because now, I mean, like you said, they got Oklahoma coming in, and then they got currently number 1 Tennessee coming into town next week. I don't know where they're going to be ranked after that Florida showing, but this conference, I mean, if Georgia's going to have its best team in a decade in the same year where this conference looks like it's going to eat itself apart, you never know. I think that Georgia could end up being anywhere in these conference standings. You got to hope for 500, but I don't think you should set any ceiling on the expectations for this team. They've shown that they can overcome some cold spells. Some nights the 3-point shot might be falling, and they might perform even better than they did. So that's a great spot for Georgia basketball to be in. And it's really, as we've said in this show for a couple of years now, it's where Georgia basketball deserves to be as well.
Yeah, Asa Newell hit a 3 to put Georgia back up 10 against Kentucky. And it was one of those, when he pulled up to shoot it, I was like, man, what are you doing? And he sank it. He deserves a lot of credit. He played great. Somto, very aggressive against the team that he initially signed with in Kentucky. Huge win. They're going to play Oklahoma 6 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday night. That game will be on ESPN2. Be sure to keep an eye out, and I would encourage you guys to tune in for that one. It should be a good game. All right, Kipp, before we get out of here, let's talk about the college football playoff. As we're recording this, a few hours away from the Orange Bowl, Notre Dame against Penn State. And then Friday night, you've got Ohio State versus Texas. Give me your picks for both of these games. Who wins each of these games and moves on to play in the College Football National Championship?
I felt pretty confident in this game tonight before, I guess now it's a flu game. right? For Notre Dame, we got the news that a bunch of their players have been under the weather as of late. But I do think we're in these games, the margin of error is usually it's cliche, but you gotta steal possessions, just like basketball. And I think that's what this game tonight's going to come down to. I think turnovers. And I watched that Notre Dame team, and I think that their defense does an outstanding job at creating turnovers. And I just think that that is going to be the difference in this game. You'll get the quarterback position. I think that's even. I think Riley Leonard, Drew Aller, Drew's going to throw for more yards, but at the same time, yards from scrimmage probably about the same. I mean, we're talking about 150 yards from each and a touchdown, maybe. But I think in the end, Notre Dame gets an extra possession. Jeremiah Love has a touchdown run, and they Riley Leonard's forced to throw late, and Drew Aller's forced to throw late in the game, and they pick him off. So I got Notre Dame in the national championship game. Ohio State, Texas. How can we bet against the hottest team in the playoff right now? I think college football, it's about things happening that you don't expect. But if we're talking about predictions, predicting something unpredictable happen is really tough. But I am not going to predict anything that against Jeremiah Smith. I know that Texas has a defense that looks like Georgia's 2021, 2022 teams. Like it's an elite defense. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to stop him. No one's found a way to do that so far. The guy's averaging like 150 yards and 2 touchdowns right now. And I think that's where I set the over-under in this game. I think he has 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, and probably seals the game in the fourth quarter. He's the college football playoff MVP as of now. And I think overall in the end, he'll probably be the MVP of this year's playoff overall.
I think that's the matchup between these two that I'm most fascinated by is Jeremiah Smith against that Texas secondary, because that is a really talented secondary. Starting with Thursday's game, I've got Notre Dame as well. Just really liked what I saw. I was impressed by their team speed against Georgia. I mean, it was like the first drive where I was like, man, they're covering a lot of ground, and I was impressed. I'm going to have them beating Penn State. I do think it'll be close, and I'm rolling with Ohio State over Texas. Not counting Texas out, I think I would take Texas and the points because it's like Ohio State 6. But I think that Jeremiah Smith's going to be too much. I think we're going to be looking at Ohio State and Notre Dame in the national title game. A little bit of, kind of going back home for Marcus Freeman, the Ohio State Buckeye, going to be playing his former team, coaching against his former team, rather. And I think that makes for a really interesting national championship. What say you?
I think it's going to be a double-digit touchdown win for Ohio State. I do think that this Notre Dame defense, like you said, those linebackers were flying to the football early on. Outstanding job by them. But I think in the end, like when you're talking about elite playmakers, it kind of becomes that X factor when you have teams that play sound football. And I just think that he's a matchup nightmare. And prove me wrong. I don't think they're going to. I think this is Ohio State's national championship to lose. And you know what? If they don't, then go yell at Ryan Day. He'll be the one that choked yet again in a championship environment. So hey, it's probably a win-win for a lot of the people listening to this podcast right now. So I just want to see some good football, and between that and the NFL playoffs this weekend, knowing that I don't have to worry about my team playing in it, but you've got some outstanding football over the next 5 days. So this is it. This is as good as it really gets for a football fan right now.
It's going to be great. I'm sticking with my Notre Dame pick that I made after the Sugar Bowl. I just think, let's roll with it, see what they can do. And you're right. We'll sit back, maybe have some popcorn, maybe a cold beverage or two, and watch some good football over these next few days going later into that national championship game. So we'll wrap it up right there. I appreciate everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact, especially on very short notice. But we had nearly 1,700 people watch this live. We really appreciate that. go to dogs247.com. We're going to have you covered on any Carson Beck talk, any more transfer portal talk, the remaining Georgia Bulldogs who have not announced what they're doing for 2025. We'll have it all there, as well as more portal targets, any other guys that Georgia's looking at trying to add for 2025. Go to our YouTube, go to our TikTok, subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast podcast, wherever you get your podcast. A lot of good content and staying busy with football as well as Georgia men's basketball. Like I said, we'll pick up Saturday night in Stegman against Oklahoma. So we'll end the episode right there. For Kipp Adams, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.